Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet media conference. I have with me here today my colleague, the Acting Attorney General, Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, and we're here to address a couple issues. The first issue, which I will lead off on, was a decision taken by Cabinet today. Today, the Cabinet has taken a decision to ban the importation and sale of scratch bombs, what is commonly known as scratch bombs. So the Cabinet has taken a decision, and they have instructed me as the Minister of National Security, who is the minister in charge under the Explosives Act, where these items fall, to do what is necessary to implement Cabinet's decision, which is a ban on the importation and sale of these scratch bomb items. As the public will be aware, this is something that has been called for. There have been a number of incidents, both with young children as well as full adults, where they have sustained injuries and sometimes serious injuries as a result of the use of these scratch bomb items. In fact, either last year or the year before, we had an incident where irresponsible persons threw a scratch bomb into a car, and the lady, in an attempt, as I recall the facts, to save her grandchild, picked up the scratch bomb to throw it out of the car, and it exploded in her hand and she lost some fingers. We have had recent incidents with children playing with scratch bombs, and they've sustained injuries, and even some adults. So I'm happy to announce today that the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago has taken a decision to ban the importation and sale of scratch bombs, and the Ministry of National Security will move expeditiously to have this implemented as the law. And I'll now pass over to the Acting Attorney General, Minister Fitzgerald Hines.
Thank you very much, Minister Young. Very sadly, Trinidad and Tobago, we are here again today on this, what has now become a very troubling and vexed issue of the amendments to the Income Tax Act, Chapter 7501, Trinidad and Tobago. We, as you will recall, on the 25th of May 2018, this bill was taken to the Parliament for an amendment to Section 4 thereof. You will recall that Section 4 is a confidentiality provision, a privacy provision, a secrecy provision, which permits the authorities of the Inland Revenue to refuse to share information in the course of its work that it would have gathered in the course of its work with any persons other than that stipulated in the legislation. This provision is inconsistent with our promises and our expectations from the Global Forum and previously FATCA, which we resolved some time ago. And it is one of the preconditions for us proceeding and continuing to be compliant with the Global Forum in these matters. This bill went to a joint select committee of the Parliament, which consisted, as you would know, of the government, the opposition, and independent senators. It spent its time in there. Some of that time was over the vacation period, and a decision was taken in that joint select committee. 3 bills went before it, but a decision was taken by the overall committee to focus on the income tax amendment bill as I have just described it, largely because it was the shortest. In addition to that, opposition members were unwilling to work during the vacation and indicated that. And thirdly, and perhaps more importantly, it was well known to all and sundry that this was the critical next step in compliance with our obligations in the Global Forum, a grouping of 154 countries, all of whom share correspondent banking with each other, and the requirement under this forum was for us to be able to share income tax information, one income tax authority with the next, on a clear understanding that there are persons who hide monies in jurisdictions other than their own. And tax authorities are able to identify those funds for the most part tax evasion and all of these offenses around taxes. And it is important in the business of international financing, money laundering, terrorist financing, international fraud and money crimes, that tax authorities be able to share information so that Trinidad and Tobago's or the Global Forum, the other countries in the Global Forum, their citizens' tax records would be shared with the authorities in Trinidad and vice versa among the 154 countries. When these measures went before the Joint Select Committee, a decision, as I said, was taken that we'll focus on the income tax amendment. They issued a minority report, the opposition, that is to say, and in that minority report, they highlighted one issue. That income tax bill before the committee was a 10-clause bill. About 4 of them were matters that we had already dealt with in FATCA, with which they were very, very familiar because they had to be taken kicking and screaming through those to eventually support the FATCA legislation, similar legislation as it related only to the United States of America. The other 4 or 5 clauses were very informal clauses of no real operational effect. So it was only one clause, clause 5, that was an issue. And that was dealt with pretty quickly in that committee. And they issued a minority report where they expressed concerns that in that clause, 5B2 or something like that, 52B, they issued a minority report expressing a concern that before the police has access to this information, there should be a judicial process. As you should know by now, members of the media, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, in terms of the parliamentary rules, when you want an amendment to a bill in committee, you put it in writing. To this day, the UNC opposition has not put a single amendment in writing for the consideration of the government. But in the spirit of public service, we, reading their minority report, which formed part of the Joint Select Committee's outpourings, we took on board their concern about the police getting access to income tax information, and it not at that time having a judicial process where the court must order that the information be shared with the police of a certain rank, and it must be used only for specific purposes. We amended the legislation on our own to please, to satisfy, to placate the opposition's concern as expressed in that Joint Select Committee. Notwithstanding that, when the matter came back to the House recently for debate, we saw early that they, as I said earlier, began scraping around like chickens, contriving positions, trying to find and to show reasons why they should not support it, in the face of the fact that there was no clearly intellectually sustainable arguments against it. So they have been taking opposition. We are now in the committee of the whole. One of the things the UNC is saying is that they want us to go back to a Joint Select Committee with this bill. And the reasons why we must go back to this Joint Select Committee is because they want us to consider all of the 3 pieces of legislation and bring them to Parliament at the same time, having already agreed in that committee expressly that we will treat only with the income tax amendment. That is disingenuous, and it is doing a disservice to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The other issue is, one of the other bills is 148 clauses long. It will take far longer than it took to deal with the one clause that was troubling in this income tax bill. So they want us to go back to committee. Well, now we are before the Parliament again, not a Joint Select Committee, but a committee of the whole House, all 41 of us sitting there. And every single member can raise any issues he has with any provision in the bill, as well as, even at this stage, he or she could submit a written amendment according to his or her tastes or feelings on it. That, as I said, has not been done. So we have been trying with the opposition. The Minister of Finance, under whose purview this directly falls, income tax, he wrote 2 letters within recent days to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition. One dated the 12th of November 2018, and the other one dated the 19th of November 2018, outlining in great detail and measure the seriousness, the urgency, the horrors that failing to comply will bring upon every single business, every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And he identified these issues very clearly. He also told the leader of the opposition in this letter that the global forum, for whom we are trying to satisfy and to comply as part of this international grouping of 154 countries, they have made it abundantly clear in writing that the only measure we need to amend at this point to meet compliance with them is the income tax amendment. So the opposition leader and the members of the opposition, they are fully aware that it is only the income tax amendment that is the critical next step at this stage. The Global Forum has also indicated in plain terms in writing and in meetings, and the Minister of Finance made it clear in this letter to the leader of the opposition on behalf of them all, that we will not be permitted to sign that international agreement that we must sign, which will allow us not to deal with each country in the Global Forum, but with all by virtue of signing on the treaty. It will take a lot shorter time and a lot less work, but we will not be permitted to sign that treaty, a treaty that the UNC in government, led by the now opposition leader, signed, well, agreed to, gave further commitments to the Global Forum on, but did not do it upon their demitting office in 2015. It falls to us. So these measures came from the UNC. We as a good government are carrying this on because we also recognize its importance for you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So having written these two letters, the first letter to her, no response. The Honorable Minister of Finance wrote a second one on November the 19th, drawing reference to the previous letter, pointing out the November deadline that we face, the crisis that Trinidad and Tobago is facing. And he has reported to the cabinet this morning that he has not heard anything from the lady. Her phones has gone dead, not taking calls. She has become virtually incommunicado. So the people of Trinidad and Tobago must now understand this is where you are being put by the opposition. And we are here today to indicate to Trinidad and Tobago. We picked this up in 2015. We understand its importance for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, for international trading relationships, for dealing with international money laundering, terrorist financing, and other international crimes. And in addition to that, in terms of our local arrangements, just imagine as it now stands on that section 4, if the police are investigating some bribery or some corrupt deal in Trinidad and Tobago, and they approach the Inland Revenue Department for tax information in respect of a suspect, having gone to the court having, well, under this law, they'll go to court. Yeah, and to be used for specific purposes, as we know, they will not now be able to access it. And when the opposition, as I conclude, when the opposition claims to be doing this in the public interest, I want to remind the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago that the Bankers Association are now calling for this. They have called on the UNC to support this legislation. They having seen it with their lawyers and satisfied with it. In fact, we are told that some banks have already begun to feel the effects of de-risking. Some banks are not now being able to trade and to do business transactions as they would. The chambers of when the opposition is claiming that they are doing it in the interest of the people, I think I can say safely as I conclude here that even the ordinary citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who must receive medication from abroad, who must send money for their children at universities abroad, who must transact simple business transactions, they too want it, and they also want it because they would want the police and the authorities to be able to access all information to deal with crime and money laundering and those kinds of things in Trinidad and Tobago. That's where we are, and we are prepared to take any questions that you, the media, might have on these matters.
Thank you very much, Minister Hines. Just to emphasize a couple of the points that Minister Hines touched on a short while ago, and the effects that this legislation or the non-passage of this legislation will have on citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. You all would have seen earlier this week the Bankers Association say that they have already, two of their banks have already started feeling the effects of de-risking and have lost correspondent banking. For any bank in Trinidad and Tobago to conduct international banking transactions on your behalf as a citizen, they have to have correspondent banks in foreign jurisdictions. As a result of the non-passage of this legislation, we have had two of our local banks come out and say that they have begun to lose correspondent banking. That is going to have an effect on the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So let the UNC not tell you any distorted reality that this is hypothetical. On this occasion, we have begun to feel the effects. And I take you all back to the FATCA debate where we were doing this specific for the United States tax authorities and the risks that we're going to face there. There is no real difference between those two pieces of legislation that was passed for FATCA and this current one. In fact, FATCA is affected by this by giving them some more, as I understand it, a broadening of their approach and their powers. So these are very important matters, and as Minister Hines, the Acting Attorney General, has said, the government will be taking this back to Parliament tomorrow. At this stage, we've received absolutely no formal communication from the opposition with any suggestion to either to how they would like the legislation amended or to either of the two letters that Minister Hines has referred to that the Minister of Finance has sent. And we will take some questions at this stage. Any topics?
So what's going to happen tomorrow then, if you all don't know what they're going to do, and how realistic is this deadline now? At this stage, do you all think we're going to make it?
Well, the deadline is not a deadline set by us. As you all would have heard both Minister Hines and the Substantive Attorney General tell us a couple weeks ago. In fact, I can tell you the Attorney General isn't here today because he's dealing with CFATF in Barbados, and there has been a contingent sent from the Ministry of Finance to deal with Global Forum in a South American country. So at this stage, our international obligations are that we have to meet this deadline. If the opposition refuses to support it, I guess Trinidad and Tobago will be thrown into the reality of a potential collapse of our international banking system. As I've told you all, the Bankers Association have told us two of their members have already started that de-risking process and they have lost correspondent banking. So God forbid that we reach that stage. But the government, there are 23 votes there from the government, and we are throwing our full weight and support behind it. And as Minister Hines pointed out, the one amendment that they asked for the judicial process before the grant of the information, that has been inserted into the bill now.
International banks have started the de-risking.
Could you cite international financial journals that support the government's position here of the whole urgency?
Well, it's not financial journals. In fact, quite interestingly, if you all follow what is going on with some of our CARICOM neighbors, yesterday or day before, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who's also in charge of the Barbadian economy, as I understand it, did indicate that they are taking similar changes to their legislation in terms of the deregularization or getting rid of their IBCs, their international business companies, etc., to keep in line with Global Forum. So throughout all of the members of Global Forum, they're all going through, well, many of them are ahead. We are the only one that is this far behind. So it's not to say you need an international journal. What it is a treaty obligation, is a legal obligation. And if we don't fulfill it, it is going to affect our banking system. We're not making this up.
The opposition is therefore playing politics purposely here, because if the country is blacklisted, it's blacklisted under your watch.
I think they're not playing politics with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, because the people of Trinidad and Tobago, when doing their measurement, will see that the government has done all that it can do. The government has not only made the one amendment they called for, The government has written to them, the government has held itself available, and the draftspeople tell us what you want changed and it will be dealt with. They refuse to do so. So the public of Trinidad and Tobago is an intelligent public, and what they will see is that the UNC has crashed the banking system of Trinidad and Tobago, not the government.
So that during the debate, we heard them raising spurious arguments. This is why we could describe with justification this as contrived positions. They're looking for reasons, but they must know something. They must fear something that we don't know, because there's no logical reason not to support this, given that it was born with them. They were the ones who gave the Global Forum commitment to it, and further commitments later on in writing. But by September 2015, it was not fulfilled. We are part of this Global Forum, 154, and as Minister Young said, we are the only country today that is non-compliant in this because of the last government, and without harking back too much, and now that we are in the parliament, this requires a special majority. And we have seen every single time a measure comes to the House that requires a special majority, there is always this behavior from the UNC, whether it was the anti-gang law, which they had previously passed, whether it was FATCA, whether it was the gambling law, for an example. Well, no, that one, again, their baby. It is now before Joint Select Committee and they're dragging it out. We're trying to get it out of there to regulate the gambling industry, to protect people, and to get our fair share of taxes in a regulated environment. Whenever a bill for a special majority comes, the UNC sees it as a signal to take positions on it, with a record of the PNM where we supported at least 78% of the time, in terms of numbers. Over 90 measures we can identify 90% of the time, where we gave support to the UNC in government for measures that we considered to be in the public interest. So this is another example of their intransigence. They are putting you, the people, at risk, and we can only do our best. As Minister Young says, we have 23 votes, and we will make every one of our votes available for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We pledge that on this important matter. It is the UNC that is being intransigent, and we are hoping, but we'll take it tomorrow to the Parliament because the deadline is on us. And we will put it to a vote, and it will be for them to decide whether they'll act in your interest or whether they will act on some secret information or motive that they will not reveal publicly as the true reasons why they don't want to support this. What are they afraid of? I don't know. The Prime Minister made a major speech in the last weekend in Tobago from a convention platform. A large chunk of that speech had to do with white-collar crimes, corruption, and the government's deep commitment, not just philosophically, but in practical terms in dealing with it. I have noticed that there has not been a single comment from any member of the opposition. Is it that they have some information we don't? Is it there's something to be afraid of? Well, there's a committee in the Parliament. We are in committee now, live before the national audience. The people listening, the people are watching, let them come there, all of them, and say what their issues are. Until they do that, we will do what we have to do, and you will be the judge.
You denied this before. The accusation came again yesterday evening via email from the opposition leader, where she was talking about her reservations. Chief among them, first reservation, she said, we're in this position because of poor management of the legislative agenda by the government.
You asked a short while ago, is the opposition playing politics? I think you've just answered that question. The fact is that the bill is before the House, all right? So I deal with facts. The fact is the bill is before the House. The fact is the one concern they raised has been addressed. The fact is the government has written to them, to the opposition, saying, tell us what other concerns you have, and if they're legitimate, we will address it. And up to this point, their position remains exactly what you've just described, or is a legislative agenda. The point is here, is to be dealt with. There's a looming deadline that we have no control over, and at the end of the day, it does not affect the government of Trinidad and Tobago. It affects the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I expect them to come with all sorts of vacuous comments and all sorts of distractions, etc. But at the end of the day, as I say, the population of Trinidad and Tobago is an intelligent one, and the work of the Parliament is to be done. Minister Hines described why the other two pieces of associated legislation are not before us because the opposition refused to work during the vacation period, and they agreed at that stage, extricate this one, let's send it forward, because we have international obligations to fulfill.
Citizens believe this affects big business and not the average citizen. Can you
What Minister Hines said?
Yeah.
With the loss of correspondent banking, Mr. Samru, the loss of correspondent banking means now it will be difficult. Worst case, it could be impossible. For when you go to your local bank, you walk into your local bank to send foreign funds away to pay for your child's education or even to receive foreign funds. Where are you going to get the foreign funds? So you're getting remittances from your family away to help you pay some medical bill or any other bill. And we lose that. It means we are now cut off. In layman's terms, we are now an isolated jurisdiction from the rest of the world when it comes to foreign banking. That has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of money you have in the bank. Once you do a foreign transaction, you're on your phone and you want to shop on your phone, online shopping, etc. All of that potentially could either be lost in the worst case, or the type of fees that will now be charged by the international banks to deal with us, because the pressure is on them. They are subscribed to Global Forum. So if they are correspondent banking with persons who are in breach, they are going to then be affected by Global Forum, and Global Forum is saying, well, you can't bank with them in Trinidad because they're not compliant. And then they will just cut us off because there is no loyalty in that type of situation.
And let me give a very simple example. I mean, it will increase the cost of doing business. If you want to send $400 now to your son in the United States, they charge money, Western Union or so, they charge money for that service. That might increase, that might double the 30%, what was it? The
transaction fee,
the fee.
etc.
The last time at FATCA, they wanted to impose a 30% charge. That was what was facing us. So it affects every single person once you want to do any transaction that has to cross the water. So it's not only about big business, it will affect us all.
I wanted to go back to Minister Young's your opening comment on the scratch bombs, which is quite interesting. I wanted very well for me personally, yes. But I wanted to just to go through the mechanics of it. Do you need any fresh legislation?
No. Under the legislation, and I believe it's the Explosives Act, the Minister of National Security can declare whether items can be imported, etc. Also, the Minister of National Security has to grant licenses. For example, the importation of explosives for use in the oil and gas industry, the importation of firearms, the importation of ammunition, etc. And fireworks and scratch bombs fall under that. So it will really be going there and declaring that this particular description of item is now not going to be on the list of items that can be legally imported anymore.
We will find out, is this going to be done by like gazetting or?
I need to look at the exact process. I know it is for the Minister of National Security to do, and I can't remember, or I haven't looked at it specifically to see whether it's done via an order or just an amendment to a list or a schedule in the Act. But you will know, I mean, you will know.
Any sort of timeline that you're aiming at?
The Cabinet told me immediately. So the legal people, and I'm going to be working along with the Attorney General's office to ensure it's done in the shortest possible time frame.
Would that suggest to us what is this, silent night for Christmas?
This is only for scratch bombs. So I mean, again, we're going to be faced with the noise and correct. But the scratch bombs are a very little value, but also what is costing our medical system, and also not only the nuisance, but we're having innocent people on some occasions injured, as well as those young children who are using it. So we see it as a real nuisance, and it's the elimination of a real nuisance.
Even things like lost time, like workers, you can't get to work, like I'm talking about, like, say, the psychological effects of these things.
And as Minister Hines is reminding me, we had an incident within the last week with students using scratch bombs and I think throwing it teachers, etc. So it's getting rid of what we think is a real nuisance item, a national nuisance item in Trinidad and Tobago.
Just throwing a wild card here, is it likely that importers may try to mount any challenge under, you know, their was it the Section 3 or Section 4 rights of the Constitution of?
I don't think anybody has a constitutional right to the importation of scratch bombs or explosives or fireworks in Trinidad and Tobago. And if persons want to mount a legal challenge, that we'll meet it when they mount it. All right? Anything else?
So, I mean, those who are using it on those celebratory nights, how are we going to clamp down on those people?
Well, two things, right? Because one, what you're doing is you're banning the importation. So therefore, it should no longer be readily available. So there will no longer be that supply available. And again, it will come down to the enforcement of the law. So it is now going to be akin to having an illegal firearm. If you're found with an illegal firearm, you're found with an illegal scratch bomb, you're going to be charged and brought before the court to answer for it.
On that question, because we have laws that are written, and one would imagine that the scratch bombs are banned under so many different categories, but you said the word enforcement. So the legislative pen, will it be coupled by any more actual enforcement at ground level?
Well, what you've given me is an opportunity to once again emphasize that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, I think we're seeing a resurgence of energy with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. They have been enforcing the laws. They have the full support of the government, as I've said, as Minister of National Security, once they're acting within the parameters of the law. But so it will come down to our law enforcement officers, the men and women there, to enforce it, and I'm sure that they will. Okay.
One quick thing, Amnesty International recently said that our Attorney General's position on refugee law was wrong, so that had to go.
I did see the article, and I saw another person who's a lawyer also say the same thing. I will leave the Attorney General to deal with it, but I think the point they're taking is a very technical point, and what they're basically saying is once you sign on to an international treaty, you have a legal, they've escalated it to a legal as opposed to a moral obligation, then to pass domestic legislation to make it the law of the land. But in international law, by the mere signing of an international treaty, it does not automatically become the law of the land in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's a fact. So my understanding is that's what the Attorney General has said, so therefore the Attorney General is right, but I am not getting into any to and fro with these bodies who obviously have their agendas and want to impose their views on a sovereign state of Trinidad and Tobago.
About the tax amendment bill, it does seem like a pretty important piece of legislation is again coming down to the wire. Why does it always seem to come down to the wire, just like FATCA?
Yeah, and as we indicated, we took this to Parliament almost 7 months ago. And the opposition wanted this matter to go before a joint select committee. In the absence of that, we would have debated it and would have passed it since then. It went to the joint select committee. After about 4 meetings of the joint select committee, they took their positions, they issued a minority report, and the bill now comes back to the House with the report of the Joint Select Committee. That was laid promptly thereafter back in the House, put back on the table of the House for discussion, and we had the debate. So if you think it came down to the wire, that's the history of it, that's the reality, bearing in mind that they were familiar with this since 2011 and 2014 when they gave commitments to it. So that is the history. And now that we are here, we went to Parliament a few weeks ago, about a month ago, or about 3 weeks ago, and we intended to pass it then. They took their positions. When we saw where they were heading, we got to committee stage, and we adjourned the committee stage to give them time to come to terms with their responsibility to the people of this country and to propose any amendment that they might really have, but they have done not one so far. And here is where we are again. This is why, personally, I am severely embarrassed as a public servant in this country that we have to be putting you through this kind of situation again in the face of that kind of history. but it's not our doing. We are willing, we have done our piece, and it now falls squarely in the bosom of Madam Kamala Persad-Bissessar and the UNC to do their part to ensure that you get this protection that you need.
Comments on the late Mr. Griffin?
I have not been able to confirm anything. Just before going into cabinet this morning, certain members of the media reached out. I saw messages come through on my phone that Mr. Griffith has passed. As with the passing of any citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, we offer our sincerest condolences and sympathy to his family. He was a politician that played a role in Trinidad and Tobago, and I wish his family all of the God's blessings at this particular point in time. Okay? Thank you all very much.